Ugh. I think it's for the best if any and all future videos I make like this if they're not in 4x3. There. A while back I heard a few instances of different people saying Sega doesn't market Puyo Puyo as well as they should. I was wondering how true that was. So I made a poll on my Twitter that somehow has a modest follower amount, thinking it would get 50 votes at best, which is way highballing it. But it ended up getting 409 votes? Okay. I asked in this poll which of these games is directly responsible for making you a Puyo Puyo fan. I could have been more specific, and I could have been less specific. But I think I was specific enough. Most of the replies did seem to understand I don't mean the first Puyo Puyo game you played, just the one that made you a fan. Which was my intention. I put 4 things on the list. Puyo Puyo Tetris 1, Puyo Puyo Champions, Puyo Puyo Tetris 2. And an older game. I chose what I chose for a few reasons. As of writing, PPT 1, Champions, and PPT 2 are the 3 newest games Sega has made since they brought Puyo Puyo back in the West, with PPT 1 no less. Which means I'm excluding the Sega Ages versions of Puyo 1 and 2 as they are new releases of old games. And Puyo Puyo Sun vs, which while more new than the Sega Ages releases, is still an old game though also not out at the time of writing. And I put the option an older game here because I had a hunch all of the other options would dwarf it. Was I right in my assumption? Stay tuned. First I wanna give you a taste of how all the games in an older game ranked according to the replies. Please note, this is a terrible way to rank these. For all I know most of the people who voted an older game voted because of Puyo Puyo 7, but the minority of them replied with saying Puyo Puyo 7. I did not ask people to specify to reply which game made them a fan, they just did. It was fun, but my lack of foresight makes me have to work with what I have. I didn't count mentions of Tetris and Champions as they are the main attraction. Even though PPT-1 would count as an older game, it was a popular import. Ranked at the bottom with 1 point is Puyo Puyo 39. Puyo Puyo 39 is a minigame on a Hatsune Miku game on 3DS, which released in the West 2 years before PPT-1 did. Can I say that Puyo Puyo is a pretty awesome minigame to have in an unrelated game? It's what single-handedly saved Sonic Mania and Yakuza 6. Citation needed. Now for the 2 pointers. Sonic Mania. It has a Puyo Puyo minigame and one of the bosses. It's a fully functional game. They put effort into homaging Puyo Puyo / Mean Bean Machine. Surprised nobody said Yakuza. I guess Hatsune Miku and Sonic has more overlap with Puyo than Yazuka I guess. I wouldn't know. Next 2 pointer. Puyo Puyo 92. What I find interesting is that a lot of people have answered with unlocalized games. Yes, it's localized but you know what I mean. It was thought to be a bootleg for so long for a reason. Probably started with a YouTube video recommended to them or started with a different Puyo game, and Puyo 1 ended up clicking with them. The fact OPP did have a translation does help to become a fan. I could say the same of the next 2 pointer, Puyo Puyo 15th. I don't have much to say there. It had a translation patch, and it will have a newer one soon. Our first of many 3 pointers, Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. What would be a lot of people's exposure to Puyo Puyo as it was basically the most accessible Western game. I think. It should be noted that I noticed this game was mentioned a lot, but wasn't given the credit for making someone a fan. And that makes sense to me. It's the Puyo Puyo gameplay, but with none of the characters they may or may not become a fan of. That's one way of becoming a Puyo fan at least. It's also possible this game made people love Puyo Puyo 1 later. I don't know, don't expect me to cover every base. Dr. R's MBM is a very important game in Puyo Puyo history. You may not like it, but it's true. There's also a lot of unrecognized effort gone into this game which I may talk about in a future game. Next 3 pointer is Puyo Puyo Sun. Specifically the Puyo Nexus translation it seems. And not hard to see why people like it. It's easily the funniest Puyo game, and it's easy to endear Puyo by being funny. How do you think Shizo dug his way into everyone's hearts in PPT-1? Next 3 pointer seems to be Minidi Puyo Puyo. You might know it as Puyo Pop. This one is kinda surprising to me. Though I shouldn't be that surprised. It's just Puyo Puyo Fever's less successful older brother. It's a perfectly fine Puyo game. The last 3-pointer is Puyo Puyo 7. This one does surprise me even if it's about as likely as 15th. It's already been retranslated. I recommend it. I had a great time. I give Puyo Puyo 7 the Puyo Puyo 7 stamp of approval. The next is a 4-pointer, which isn't even a game. It's YouTube videos. Two specific ones being Fujingling's video, Puyo Puyo Tetris animated. Apologies to Fujingling whether she's watching or not for possibly mispronouncing her name. Even if I did know how to pronounce it, I'd probably say it wrong. I have a thick dialect, as you can hear. It's easy to see why this video would make new fans. I don't have much to say about it besides I don't like it as much as I think I should. That's neither here or there. It's a well done piece of animation by an accomplished animator. I believe she worked on Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Also known as that show people recently won't stop talking about how everyone slept on it. I'll check it out someday. It does seem like I need to be in a certain mood to start watching, said mood being a good one. So that's gonna take a while. I hear nothing but good things as of recent. A second video, here's a snippet. It reminds me of how I got into Super Mario. Links in the description. If I don't forget to add them. Second to last with 6 points, Puyo Puyo Tetris. Specifically the translation patch of Super Puyo Puyo Tetris. PP2 is a very popular rule, so it makes sense this game is as popular as it is, I assume. And the highest ranker in the an older game category based replies by 10 points is Puyo Pop Fever. This is not surprising. It's the one time Sega tried advertising Puyo Puyo at the time. It was released on GameCube, DS, and if you live somewhere else than America, Game Boy Advance, PSP, PC, Dreamcast, PS2 and Xbox. As well as whatever these are. It's the one Puyo Puyo game people knew about that could be bought in the store at the time that isn't Mini Puyo Puyo. And sure, it was on GameCube, which was far from the best selling console of that generation. But that's counterbalanced by also being on DS. So is there a reason it wasn't sold on PS2 in the US? I bet it isn't a good reason. And that was my not very scientific counting of these games. Here's a pie chart. And now fit this pie chart into this bar. I don't do math. An older game is at 35% on this poll. Doesn't take a genius to figure that in a 4-option poll that's a pretty dominating lead. To be fair, it's 3 separate Puyo Puyo games versus the rest of them in one option. I expected this. Now for the main events. How well did PPT1, Champions, and PPT2 rank? It's probably not a secret which of these was voted for the most, so let's start at the bottom. The least voted for gamies. Puyo Puyo Champions at 1.2%. So, I could give several different reactions for comic effect. But I'll give my honest reaction to this. This is somehow both more and less than I expected. For those who are not in the know, Puyo Puyo Champions is a budget Puyo Puyo game with an esports focus. It's even called Puyo Puyo Esports in Japan. All it has in terms of modes is Puyo Tetris and Puyo Fever rules. Its presentation has been cut down so it doesn't get too distracting for higher level players, and there's no story mode or not much at all to have the people who like stories and offline content satisfied. Not to mention it's the first big game since Puyo Puyo Tetris 1 on Switch released. And it's without Tetris, and everything else. Even if it's a quarter of the price Puyo Puyo Tetris 1 and 2 were, that's not worth the price for a lot of people. Even if it's the only way to play the Fever rule on most current consoles. Puyo Puyo has a split in its fanbase. It might be more accurate to say it has a lot of splits in the fanbase, but that's neither here or there. I am part of this fanbase, but I am at a distance and I barely look at it from said distance. But I digress. The split I'm talking about is the split that loves the characters of Puyo Puyo and are willing to get through the gameplay they just are not any good at to see the characters make noises with their mouths. And the fans that actually like Puyo Puyo's gameplay. Have a poll that I made while editing this video that possibly undermines me. But I am too deep in this video to course correct and therefore I can't acknowledge this poll as much as I should. Let's continue with the video as normal in 3, 2. There's overlap of course. The fact Puyo Puyo had characters is what made it stand out in the falling block puzzle game genre to begin with. The fact they actually had things to say, funny stuff, it endeared audiences to these characters, and history repeats itself with Puyo Pop Fever and the Tetris games. The characters are what endear people to Puyo Puyo. And Puyo Puyo champions, while not devoid of it, does lack it. Characters prefer to count their chains with numbers instead of performing their spells. And one more point against champions is that esports are overrated and a niche subsection of any competitive game with a very vocal fan base. Games won't sell much if they are only esports. I think something similar happened to Street Fighter V initially. Story modes in fighting games, and in Champion's case a puzzle game, do matter, doesn't matter if you heard otherwise. This isn't an absolute truth, but it's a truth nonetheless. Any game that super serves the competitive side of a fan base has to be content being what it is. And let's give credit to Puyo Puyo champions, I do think it is content with what it is. Pure competitive Puyo Puyo for the fraction of the price of big girl Puyo Puyo games. And in theory the fact it's a niche product in this fan base, hardcore competitive players should get what they want out of it. But I am not one to judge. I have a personal disdain for any competitive section of a fan base, specifically defining anything's worth based whether it's competitively viable or not, like that's all that matters. Something that doesn't really matter in SU rules, so in that case it's moot. That doesn't sit right with me. Again, I am kinda out of touch with the Puyo fan base as a whole, so I wouldn't know. I gotta imagine even competitive players wanted more out of this game though. I also just can't handle large groups of people cheering and being loud, and esports is full of that. In short, Puyo Puyo champions existing has merit. But this comically low percentage does make sense. Not many people would become a Puyo Puyo fan with this game. Those sure were a bunch of words I spoke. On to the next game that made people a Puyo Puyo fan. At 13% is Puyo Puyo Tetris 2. So similarly to Champions, PPT2 has one things going against them getting a higher score. A lot of people already became fans with PPT1. Not to mention diminishing returns. Not to mention it barely has any new content. But it would still attract new fans for one reason or another. Many of them being the same as PPT1 I'll probably list later on. And it also added Sonic in an update. That had to make a few new fans. I hope a lot of Sonic fans hated Mean Beam Machine and ended up loving Puyo Puyo Tetris 2 despite it being less Sonic, despite it actually having Sonic. In short, the reason why this number isn't as high as it could be is because PPT1 exists. People who played that already had a good idea if they would like PPT2 after having touched PPT1. Why did I have more to say about Puyo Puyo Champions? And the last game at a whippity whopping 50.9% is Puyo Puyo Tetris 1. This game has an interesting history, but I'm gonna explain it as it's been described to me. Because I'm autistic enough to be curious about this, but also autistic enough that I crumble at the prospect of researching something I don't already know a lot about. So take this with a grain of salt. Back in the Wii era, Puyo Puyo was gaining increasingly less sales. With 20th anniversary, believe it or not, actually being a commercial failure, whether it's a case of the DS, Wii, and PSP just dying out at the time, or just a byproduct of Puyo Puyo 7's lackluster reception causing a domino effect. Who knows? So Sega pursuing a Tetris crossover makes a ton of sense. Meanwhile in the West, Ubisoft had exclusive rights for Tetris for a while and they somehow made bad Tetris at that. So when the West caught wind that Japan had a good Tetris game, it got imported a lot. And Sega noticed. Sega wanted to try and bring over Puyo Puyo to the West again anyway, and doing that with Tetris. known as the best-selling game ever asterisk. That makes all the sense in the world. They just had to wait 3 years before Ubisoft would stop sitting on it. So you got this game which was bound to sell a ton, and then you put it in the launch year of the Switch, a really well-selling system. Long before the eShop was filled with trash. It was gonna sell really well. And it shows. Look at those numbers. And given how hard this game dominates this poll, I'd say the fans that stuck around. This game didn't really need to be marketed. Which I guess is the point I wanted to make. I don't know. Whenever I feel people say Sega doesn't market Puyo Puyo well, it feels like they ignore the 2 Puyo Puyo games they needed to market are Puyo Puyo Tetris 1 and 2. And Tetris markets itself, so. Yeah. Word of mouth is really strong. I wouldn't even know if they actually did a bad job marketing it anyway. The reason this video is made because I don't know. I just know Tetris, cute girls, and personality, sell. And the Puyo Tetris 1 and 2 do certainly have those. Now if Sega made a new big Puyo game without Tetris, they certainly do need to advertise it. Certainly. Please note that I put no real research into this. All I did is make a poll and make assumptions. I don't write videos like this for a living, so I don't know how to do thematic endings. I wanna end stating that I'm just rationalizing how I see things. And rationalizing isn't always true, even if I think I've been more true than I've been false. And I do try to be clear when I'm not sure about something. And of course, things can fly over my head. Also, I wanna point out, making a poll like this, it's flawed to begin with. And frankly, it's kinda arrogant to assume Myring Keedink Puyo centered Twitter account's poll votes represents Puyo Puyo fans as a whole. Imagine I am a Dragon Ball Z centered account, and then I make a poll asking what's the best Dragon Ball show. It would be really biased. Though I don't think this poll is like that. This poll reached outside my normal reach. Puyo Puyo fans of all kinds replied, so I'm pretty confident it's fairly accurate. But you can never be too sure. I wouldn't even know what kind of Puyo Puyo fans are tracked anyway. I don't really show a near a bias, not overtly anyway. I'm scatterbrained and scared. Can someone tell me how to end the